I love JRPGs and the games inspired by them, and I've played a disturbingly large number of them. Final Fantasy, Persona, Dragon Quest, Tales, Golden Sun, Shin Megami Tensei, Fire Emblem, Kingdom Hearts, Star Ocean, Xenoblade, and so many more. And because of this, I've grown to find in my 37 years on this planet which tropes, both in storytelling and in gameplay, stick out to me as friction points that I hope aren't present in modern games, but often are. So consider this video an open letter to any JRPG developers, highlighting some of the most egregious tropes that just don't work. Obviously, I'm going to be discussing a bunch of games freely here so that I can provide examples of these tropes. Now, I've done my best to avoid spoilers here, but I'm going to put up a warning just in case. So let's dive in with a big one relating to storytelling in JRPGs, and any type of storytelling for that matter. But can we stop backloading the crux of stories into the last 10 to 20% of the game? I know it's really important that there's a payoff for getting to the end of the game and that games need to have a build up, but I cannot tell you how many times I see games put all of their eggs in the end game basket, only for the big twist to either not pay off or invalidate the first 3/4 of the game, and it drives me nuts. Stories where you have to chase after the MacGuffins for the first half of the game only to discover that they weren't what you were looking for in the first place, or those MacGuffins get instantly destroyed by the antagonist, or stories where the antagonist you thought you were chasing actually only turns out to be a minor inconvenience to make way for the major villain. It's even worse when this is done multiple times in a game, but it's very common to the point where I, and I'm sure many players, can assume that whoever you're looking for at the start of any JRPG isn't who you're really after, and your goal is likely to look completely different by the end of the game. So you can't help but wonder what you were even doing for those first 20 odd hours. The worst offender for this, at least to me, is Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, a big selling point of Kingdom Hearts is the Disney worlds, because of course they are. And I really love how the first couple of Kingdom Hearts games, who still do this trope, but not as badly by the way, interweave the story of the Disney worlds with the overarching plot of the game. The themes translate into what Sora is doing, but with Kingdom Hearts 3, or even any Kingdom Hearts game after Birth by Sleep at least, you could remove pretty much every Disney world from that game and the story would stay exactly the same. You could argue that nothing actually happens in Kingdom Hearts 3 until the party reaches the Keyblade Graveyard, and I can't be doing with that. This one is more gameplay related, and I know it's rooted in history, especially outside of RPGs. Fighting game characters have done this since the dawn of time, but can we stop RPG characters, certainly anime-coded ones, from announcing their moves every time they perform them? You're probably going to notice that in a lot of the entries I've made on this list, it's typically anime tropes that annoy me in JRPGs, which I understand that there's a problem there because those two things are part and parcel with one another for a lot of these tropes. But I find the less a JRPG delves into anime tropes like these, the more I tend to enjoy it. I've been known to tell people that I'm not an anime fan, and that's technically true, but it's not because I don't like the medium at all. In fact, I have some favourite films that are anime, like Akira and Ghost in the Shell. It's that I find that a lot of animes can be really tropey and predictable a lot of the time, and that's now translated into video games in a lot of ways. So hopefully this means the next time this conversation comes up when I'm streaming, follow me on Twitch and TikTok, etc. if you want to catch me live, by the way, I can at least explain myself better. In terms of announcing moves as they're performed, this is very much an anime trope, and my god, it's irritating. In Xenoblade Chronicles, I could only hear, "I'm really feeling it," or "Now it's Rhine time," so many times before I want to pierce my eardrums, but it's not actually the worst example. That has to be literally any Tales of game. Practically every playable character, and some that aren't, seemingly just can't help themselves but announce every single move they do. Demon Fang, Tiger Strike, Rising Falcon, First Aid. It's like, shut up! And even worse, when every character is doing it, you end up with this cacophony of overlapping voice lines that just creates an absolute nightmare of audio. The music's some of the best parts of these games, but not if I can't hear it. Going back to the narrative side of things, I have to talk about this because it actually puts me off games almost single-handedly, and has even affected my existing love for previous experiences, which I try very hard to fight against because it shouldn't really. I hate it when a game gatekeeps its audience by design because you're expecting to have almost encyclopedic knowledge of previous games in the series from your players, including some that aren't even on the same platforms, to understand what's going on in the current game, because you had to be there, you don't understand the context, this reference isn't for you. One thing that I will give the Final Fantasy franchise, for the most part, it's no longer true for Final Fantasy VII, more on that later, is that each entry is anthological. Final Fantasy X is not required to play Final Fantasy XIII, but while the naming conventions can be a bit awkward sometimes, at least Final Fantasy X-2 is advertised as a follow-up to 10. So it's easy to see that you really should have played 10 first before playing 10-2, and that's true with other RPG franchises as well, like Persona and the Tales franchise, but that's not true for all of them. I promise you, I'm not going to spend this entire video ragging on Kingdom Hearts. I actually do really enjoy KH, but it is one of the tropiest video game franchises out there. It's like the poster child of you had to be there, because if you skipped games like Chain of Memories, 358 Over 2 Days, or Birth by Sleep, and just played Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3, you wouldn't even know who half the cast were. And the less said about Ephema randomly being dropped in as a Deus Ex Machina, the better. Kingdom Hearts, however, isn't the game that has actively warded me away because of this, though, and I think this is a matter of taste and fear rather than it being actually bad, because people who want a full world-building exercise and like their stories to be massively sprawling and everything that's terrifying to me would be the Trails franchise. Trails in the Sky, Trails of Cold Steel, Reverie, Daybreak, Through the Horizon, etc, etc, etc. It feels like in order to get into this franchise, you need at least 500 spare hours to experience it even somewhat, let alone if you want to extract everything, and girl, that's really difficult to find in one's adult life these days, especially to risk all that time and money spent. There's a lot of games here across that many games to find you then don't like the payoff. It's a genuine fear for me, but for what it's worth, I would like to find time to play Trails in the Sky first chapter and at least get started on it. This entry comes in from one of my Patreon members, Cobalt Zork, which I absolutely agree with. Having status effects in a game where they're largely useless. Yes. So much this. What is it with having these massive lists of abilities which are designed to debuff enemies and make them easier to beat, but so many enemies are immune to them that you feel like you're wasting your time trying one out to see if it'll work, or to scan to see which ones you can use only to discover that none of them work. If you're gonna have a big old list of abilities that are practically useless, then don't put them in. It's like a fake complexity. The option to use these abilities is there, but let's be real, how often do you actually use them? I'll be featuring comments from my Patreon members throughout this video, and I would love for you guys to join in too. So if you want to get involved and also get a title card made just for you by me and support the channel at the same time, then check out the link in the description box below. Xenoblade is pretty bad for this, partially because it plays like an MMO, and MMOs certainly have lists upon lists of debuffs due to the nature of the game, but in my opinion, that's no excuse. Xenoblade is not an MMO. You're not dealing with 8+ players worth of abilities. I don't want to see the UI overcluttered with a bunch of icons that don't meaningfully impact combat individually, or worse, mask the ones that are making an impact. But at least in Xenoblade they are actually doing something for the most part, as opposed to early Final Fantasies, I'm talking like 1 to 6, where you're given tons of status spells, blind, silence, poison, slow, confused, toad, mini, etc, 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 only to find you never use basically any of them throughout the whole game, because anything that can be afflicted by them is just as likely to fall over to regular attacks, and the main enemies you would fight using them are immune to them, so then you can't. Okay, this goes back to the anime-ness of it all, and actually ties into the previous entry of having to use external means to understand the context of the story. But if there's one thing I cannot stand, it's over-explanation, particularly of things that don't need it, or even worse, didn't need it but now do because of changes that it's been decided to need it to fit the context of a sequel or a remake. Retconning has ruined many a franchise for me, the most notable of which aren't JRPG or anime related at all, namely Star Wars and Alien, but I do my best to take each new entry as its own beast and not let it ruin the previous ones. That experience is technically still very much intact as it was, but sometimes these new pieces of information and media that come to light make it really hard not to look at these original pieces and say, well, if the writers don't care about canon, then why should I? The worst offender for this, and I reckon this will be a hot take, is actually Final Fantasy VII, or more specifically, it's Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. When Final Fantasy VII Remake came out and it was clear that things were going to be shaken up and be a little different, I was here for it. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out given how Kingdom Hearts has gone, but I was willing to keep an open mind. Then, when Ever Crisis introduced the character of Glenn, and the allusions to his relationship with Cloud and Sephiroth, I could feel the eye twitching, and then Rebirth kinda doubled down on this, and made Ever Crisis contextual lore, which, as I've said, also hate that, and the worst bit of it all is how Ever Crisis has now made it that Sephiroth was never truly evil. His sword is. The Masamune apparently makes Sephiroth crazy, and realistically, I laughed out loud when I saw this, and I'm gonna be real with you. I am still keeping an open mind where possible for part 3, but girl, I am worried about where all of this is going. We never needed the Masamune to get this big ol' explanation. As far as we were concerned, it was just a cool, iconic sword that Sephiroth has. But now, it has its own spirit, it grows and shrinks at will, it's infusing Sephiroth with negative energy through the meteor that Jenova came in. Enough. Just no more. This next entry is one that covers both storytelling and gameplay, and it's something that makes it extremely hard for JRPG fans to help recommend newcomers, and it's something I know that you've all heard before. Oh no, don't worry, it gets really good after the first 20 hours. If it takes 20 hours, the entire length of a lot of other games, for me to want to give this game a shot, then why would I not just play something else? Same with the story being backloaded into the finale of a game. You wouldn't have this problem if you had better pacing. And if a ton of that pacing is unnecessary grinding, it's still a problem. It's just not a narrative one. It's a way that the game is made to make it feel longer than it needs to be. Now, I think that this comes from the, frankly, stupid idea that players feel like quantity and hours spent in a game compared to dollars spent on it is more important than the quality of the game. Well, let me tell you now, I would be 10 times happier, and have been many a time, paying full price for a 10 to 15 hour experience that I enjoyed all of, than a 50-hour one or an even longer one that I only enjoyed 20 hours of. I think we lack conciseness and focus in a lot of modern games in the name of making it bigger, and I'd quite like it to come back. I can give you examples of this trope being done badly here, there, and everywhere. Final Fantasy XIII being arguably the most famous example. Dragon Quest VII has such a drawn-out opening that it's specifically being addressed for the upcoming reimagined remake. Christ, Xenosaga took literal hours before you got out of tutorial sections. But instead, I want to talk about a game that gets this one right. I know people are somewhat sick of glazing, I hate that word by the way, Expedition 33 this year, but in this particular example, Expedition 33 absolutely nails this concept. You are invested in this world, its characters, and its story within 10 minutes of loading the game up, and I will never stop applauding this game for how quickly it establishes a firm base that it blossoms from for the rest of the game. More games need to do this. Don't give me 20 hours to get bored before you decide that now's the time where I need to pay attention. Make me want to pay attention from the start. This next one comes from Luca Yasha, another one of my Patreon members, talking about the forcibly splitting up of the player party, using Final Fantasy X as an example, and the Via Purifico or underwater combat, as you're forced to use certain characters you may not have used up until that point, creating a friction point for the gameplay from then on because you're then stuck at a lower level. And while I agree with this somewhat, I think it's a matter of how it's executed rather than the concept. I actually really like using characters outside of my comfort zone because I like to be surprised by things, so unless I'm forced to play a character I wouldn't normally, I might not realise that I like that character until that point. I've discovered many a favourite character that way, but having no passive XP gain or way to have them catch up in a situation where you do need to play them and not being given any indication of the fact that you need to play that character up until it's too late, that's not cool, and it's done far too often in JRPGs, though admittedly, it does seem to be getting better with time. From a narrative perspective, if there is one trope I absolutely cannot stand because I think it's lazy, trite, and it sucks the atmosphere out of literally any story almost in one fell swoop, not just in JRPGs, it's death fakeouts. Stop doing this. If you don't have the cojones to see an event as impactful as a character's death through, then don't perform offing your characters. Simple as that. Having a character die, but not really die, or get resurrected, or reincarnated as a different character, or just generally showcasing the magic of plot armor is, quite honestly, cheap. And I'd even go so far as to say emotionally manipulative. You're gunning for this visceral reaction to somebody's favorite character, only to make that player then question their feelings when it turned out to be nothing. That's not a moment of relief, it's just annoying. Let actions have consequences in storytelling, just across all media. Don't keep destroying narrative tension. Final Fantasy IV is the founding father of the death fakeout. Almost every party member dies at one time or another, and you know how many of them actually do in FF4? One of them. Poor old Teller. Palom and Porum get turned to stone, which, given that their children could have had real impact, and it gets reversed, no worries. Both Cid, Polendina, and Yang get blown up and then turn up again later as if nothing had happened except a quick knock on the head. Even Gold Bez doesn't really die because he comes back in the after years. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 does this pretty badly as well. I don't mind the return of the character in question per se, but given that their death is basically the starting point for Shulk's entire journey, bringing them back just undermines the emotional trauma that starts the entire game. And it's just not explored very well in my opinion, because something more important is happening at the same time. So it's just not given enough chance to breathe. What makes this even worse is the fact that character deaths can have an incredible impact, and that makes it even more egregious. Look at Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, or, in my opinion, the absolute best example is Sarah from Valkyria Chronicles. If they came back, it would literally ruin those stories. It's like JRPGs have some pathological fear of commitment in case they can't bring these characters back for a sequel, as has been made evident with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's a break of trust in the story when you could just go, no, didn't happen, different universe, multiverse, don't worry about it didn't happen. Another entry from one of my Patreon members here, Golden Garu, who says that they dislike the unwinnable boss fight trope, especially those you can win under normal circumstances like Jasper in Dragon Quest XI. I'm really glad you gave an example on this one, because I actually think that done well, the unwinnable boss fight is a great asset in a JRPG because it accentuates the importance of the character. Beatrix in Final Fantasy IX is a brilliant example, and she's actually one of my favourite characters of all time because of it. You never actually beat her, she's just that good before she turns the tables. And I'd also say the same is true for some generally overpowered characters too. Take Orlando in Final Fantasy Tactics, for example. He has presence and doesn't actually speak all that much, nor does Beatrix, come to think of it. Their actions speak for them, and they have a precedent set because of those actions. And I think that's great, but in the case of Jasper, or any situation where a character wins just because, yeah, that is annoying. One last entry from one of my Patreon members again, thank you again, and if you haven't had your comment featured here, as there were rather a lot of them, don't worry, because I've got a lot more examples and can easily make a second video on this subject. There's a lot of JRPG tropes out there, so if you want to get yours in, there's still time, and this one comes from Pale Raider, who talks about final dungeon design being bad, anticlimactic, or lazy, using Final Fantasy IX as an example due to reskinned bosses, and Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, which has traps in its final dungeon that teleport you back to the start if you aren't careful. Now, I don't know about Final Fantasy IX here, I actually really like Memoria personally, but I can still see the critique, because you are right about final dungeons dropping the ball at the last hurdle, and Memoria does like to use bosses it's already used before. However, I would say that just dungeon design in general is something that JRPGs don't put enough focus on. I really enjoy Atlas RPGs, but more often than not, they can't design a dungeon to save their life. Metaphor highlights this pretty heavily with just how many of its dungeons look identical except for very specific ones, and in those dungeons everything looks the same, so it's really hard to navigate them. But the Persona games actually take the cake here, as using Persona 3 as the example, Tartarus isn't just the final dungeon, it's basically every dungeon, and it's just repetitive layouts and the same aesthetics from start to finish. It's just a war of attrition, and it's just not very interesting. Heck, even Pokemon falls prey to this with the various Victory Road dungeons. I'd love to see a final dungeon in a Pokemon game that wasn't stuck in a cave with maybe a boulder or 20 to push around and the occasional trainer fight. This hasn't been as bad recently, and I know Pokemon's meant to be more simple, but come on. The audience has grown up tons, we can do better than this. At least HMs aren't a thing anymore. Hey guys, we're almost at the end, but first we have to endure a few hours of random encounters, color-coded switches, in the same corridor 50 times over. As I said, I have a ton of examples that I've not included in this video that I could easily talk about. I've not touched on overt fan service, looking at you Xenoblade 2, annoying mascot characters, or as you know dialogue, which is actually the worst, by the way, so I may well have to make a part 2 to this, but considering that, let me know in the comments what JRPG tropes you'd like to see get in the bin, because there are upsettingly a lot of them. So let's get it all out here so that we can laugh about it later. Thank you so very much for watching, everybody, and if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and if you want to continue the discussion, come find me on Discord, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. It's all linked in the description box below, or if you search up Joesephyr on any platform you like, I'm pretty sure you'll find me. Growth's been really great lately. I've hit 25,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I've hit 37,000 on TikTok, but I know we can do so much more, so your sub and your support is greatly appreciated. But until next time, catch you later, everybody. Have a good one, won't you? Take care.